joined here by Vixon and Yaz. For those who don't know, if you don't follow us on the Instagram page, Niema's taking a little leave of
Sabbatical.
absence. Yeah, yeah.
A sabbatical.
Some time off, so she got to balance school and work, which
What
kind
did
of
you do, Stephen?
I didn't do anything this
I'll
time.
give you the tea later.
That's what they
No,
all
it
say.
doesn't.
No snitching.
Shh.
It wasn't
Cut
me.
his mic.
But yeah, like she just taking a break. She got to balance school and work, which is kind of what we was discussing last week with millennials now dealing with a lot of shit. So she'll be back. She'll be back when she's ready.
You gotta have 15 jobs out here.
Mm.
Gotta have 15 jobs, a PhD, a side job.
And start bleaching because this skin tone hasn't been working this far.
Oh boy.
And we're in.
And now we're Sammy Sosa. Good job. Happy Puerto Rican Day.
Hey, wepa!
It all comes full circle.
So the focus for this week is gonna be cultural appropriation. I had no idea as to why the fuck we was gonna talk about this week, so I was like, "Fuck it, cultural appropriation it is."
It's been popping up a lot.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, with the Drake and the blackface thing,
Yeah.
somewhat.
That's,
Ah,
that's you have some thoughts on that?
about Drake and blackface?
Yeah, talk about it.
I don't know what the fuck that guy was thinking.
Yeah, there's no excuse for it. There's no validation for it.
Well, I think he tried to say that it was to bring light to like actors who can't get jobs, blah blah blah,
Mhm.
and it just kind of reminded me of like what was that movie Bamboozled and like shit like
I
that.
was gonna mention that. Yeah.
So I mean, if that's where you were going with it, cool.
But
But where you at now?
mm,
We need you at the Black Lives Matter march.
Yeah.
Jewelry?
not the
It
half.
would be nice. It would be nice if Drake showed up.
I mean, it'd be nice.
Well, what
but-
about the half Black Lives Matter? What about them? Where does
Black, you're black. Done.
All right. there you
Good day.
Go. There you go.
I don't think he's gonna walk into a bank and people are gonna be like, he's white passing totally.
Right.
If he wasn't Drake, he'd be, you'd run in the
Yeah, I
black
think he's
guy
okay.
walking his own.
Call the police.
Safe to
arrest-
say Drake is black. I think. He might be privileged in a lot of ways because of his religion and things like that. But
Mhm.
I don't want to take that guy's blackness. Jesus,
Yeah.
it's a tough room.
Well, I mean, he's not American, so.
Canadians don't count.
Yeah, dude,
Ever.
we don't really own him. We don't own shit.
Technically an alien.
Oh God, Trump, build the wall.
Where is the border when you need it?
Mm.
So I guess we'll start off with like defining what cultural appropriation is. I guess we'll go with like the actual dictionary definition. And it states here that cultural appropriation is a concept dealing with the adoption of the elements of a minority culture by members of the dominant culture. So I guess in layman terms, it's when, dominant culture, quote unquote, I guess white people, Caucasians or whatever, try to use things from other cultures that aren't theirs, basically. So like when white people that grow dreads or white people that may dress in a certain garb that isn't from their culture. That's basically what cultural appropriation is.
And I don't know if it's only with white people, but I think that's a dominant problem because that's the issue that we have across the board. But I think it can be done in relation to other cultures too.
I think we'll get into that
But yeah,
because
let's talk about the big issues.
yeah, we'll get into that eventually because have it all structured and whatnot. But yeah, I would have to agree. It's definitely not a thing that's only strictly for white people. You can be a person of color or be a minority and also cultural appropriate as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll start off with like how do we feel about cultural appropriation? Because I think it's different for men and women.
Really? How
Yeah,
so?
because I was thinking about it on my way here, and it was like, as a black man, I don't necessarily get offended by it as much as maybe black women do, and that's because
He's gonna call us angry.
no, not even that. That's because I see more black women be culturally appropriated as opposed to black men. Like typically when we'll see black men get cultural appropriated is usually by like a white guy that acts black. But besides that, you don't really see like, white men or other men from different ethnic groups try to emulate us.
False.
I don't know. I don't see it that often.
But the question is cultural appropriation, does it come down to the look or the like action? You know what I'm saying?
It's
Like,
both.
if you act black, are you culturally appropriating in opposed to looking black? You know
What's
what I mean?
acting black?
Oh,
No.
now we're peeling some layers.
What is that?
Uh-oh.
Now we're peeling some layers.
Because I think you guys are talking about like a general like idea of how black people should act. You know what I mean? Like,
well, not even how we should act, but
Or-
how we
or
normally how we
generally-
act within our own group. If I see a white guy try to, emulate our mannerisms or use certain slang that's not really from, like, fucking white guy from Upper West Side, using certain slang that we know that he's not from, then it's like, okay, you're doing too much.
But that's because it's a cultural component, not because that just comes naturally with being black. Like, for instance, if you're in the hip hop culture, which is appropriated all the time, and that was created by black people, black Caribbean people. Right. You know what I mean? And I think that when it gets tricky is, back in the day, it was like, okay, BC Boys, we're gonna give you a pass because you're really into the culture. You know about the roots of hip hop. You respect the people that came before you. You respect the originators, right?
Yeah, and they weren't a gimmick.
You're not a gimmick, and you're not trying to tell some kind of story that's not yours, right? And then now it's kind of like you don't even have to know shit about the culture. You know what I mean? It's like, I'll take it out of race. I'll take race out of it for a second. Like, let's say DJ culture, right? You have all these people nowadays that want to be a DJ. And they don't know shit about it. They don't know shit about vinyl. They don't know shit about the originators. They don't know that the DJ was the most important person before the rapper.
Facts.
You know what I mean? And now you're a glorified iPod shuffle, and if you got a few followers, like, you're good. You're getting booked. And you don't have any desire to learn anything more about it. You know what I mean? Or pay it forward back into the culture that you're taking from. So I think once you put race back into it and you look at it in that way, then that's what the problem is. It's more like you're borrowing or you're taking credit for something that's not yours, and you're
generating a profit from it,
right? And
you don't care about the actual culture in general.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but I still feel like it's different because for minority women, you can see way more examples of other women outside of y'all race try to emulate certain things that y'all do based on how y'all dress, how you may talk, the venues that y'all may go to. Like, you can tell when somebody outside of your culture is making an effort, as opposed to, I think men have more of this, like, inclusion thing, so you don't see it as often. Like, if you see the white guy and his swag is a bit different, it's like, all right, he may be just a product of his environment. Like, this is not necessarily him trying to be somebody that he isn't. This is just a result of learned behavior for him. And I think there's more examples of women being culturally appropriated as opposed to men, in my opinion.
But if Tyler comes from the Hamptons and he's talking about, we be wrecking it on the block.
Yeah, if Tyler talking about he trying to chop bricks, then it's like, bro.
And you're promoting drug culture. Okay, we can say that, certain things are acting black or whatever, but in the reality, it's because you come from this culture and you're making the best of it, right? You're telling the story about things that you've gone through or things that you've seen people in your neighborhood go through. You're telling a story from that perspective. Someone who doesn't come from that perspective can't tell a story like that. You know what I mean? And I think they're capitalizing a little bit off of like this drug thing, and it was more like, now you're gonna be the drug user. Like, that was never glorified in hip hop music before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now that's the thing. It's like, we went from saying, look, we gotta hustle. We gotta do this shit. We gotta do fucked up shit. Yeah. Sometimes we gotta sell drugs to the lady down the block just so our mom could eat, because that's the struggle we gotta go through. And now it's like, oh, drugs, and we're all just fucking crackheads. You know what I mean? Like, and now they're telling your kids, like, it's cool.
Right. Pop the Zenny. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
That's weird.
It's alright.
That's weird.
And when you take out that element, it just makes it kind of like baseless. You know what I mean? Like, before we were telling a story about a struggle of a group of people, and now it's just like,
it's this glorification of it.
So now we're just glorifying drug use. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I guess that's what you think it's like for black people. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's layers to that.
Yeah.
Not that type of episode.
It's an onion.
Yeah.
Peeling away.
So I guess we'll jump into like what's the difference between like cultural appropriation and, like I just mentioned, being a product of your environment and it being learned behavior. Like I mentioned, like, somebody who grows up, in a traditional, in a neighborhood that's more African American or more Hispanic, if you're young, you're gonna be impressionable. So all that stuff is gonna influence you, and you may not, you know, you may grow older and you may not have a typical, way you carry about yourself in comparison to people of your ethnic background. You will end up, being around. You may end up being like the people that you're around. Like you will have examples of white people growing up in black neighborhoods, or even black people growing up in predominantly Spanish neighborhoods, and that culture has an impact on you. So what's like the biggest difference between the two?
I think it's really recognizing your privilege and like being aware that you're like a visitor. I'm Latino. I'm Puerto Rican and Panamanian. I grew up in Flatbush, which is predominantly like Jamaican, Haitian, things like that.
Wildfire.
And I was in the backyard barbecues. I was out there whining,
Put some more jerk on that.
Put some more jerk on that. But like, first of all, I'm from a Caribbean background. So I feel like it's easier for us. We have a lot in common. Our foods are the same. Some of our rhythms and our music are the same. We're all part of the African diaspora. You know what I mean?
Big word.
But I have to recognize that I have certain privileges that people who I'm at these parties with don't have. You know what I mean? And even though I might walk into a bank and be recognized as a spick or the N-word.
Whoa.
You know what I'm saying?
Not ready for the slurs.
Anthony, edit that out.
You know what I mean? Or, look, this black girl's walking in here. You know what I mean? I also have to recognize that I have it way easier than a lot of other people. You know what I mean? That may have darker skin tones and such and such. My grandmother, she's a black woman. She's dark skinned. You know what I mean? Both of them. So it's something like, it's okay to enjoy and partake and things like that, but you have to be educated and recognize that you're partaking in someone else's culture. And when you are not giving respect to it, when you're not giving back, you know what I mean? That's when the problems come. When you're taking credit for things that aren't your own. I'm never going to come up in here and be like, Puerto Ricans invented the dirty wine, because no, we didn't. We did
That's
not.
fake news.
That's fake news.
I think like the biggest two examples of, somebody that cultural appropriates and then somebody that's a product of learned behavior, you have Riff Raff. He definitely cultural appropriates with the braids, the grills in his mouth, trying to be a rapper, and it's like, yo, this is not who you really are.
Riff Raff is hilarious. He's not funny, but just
he's a gimmick.
What he
represents is a gimmick.
It's like that movie Malibu's Most Wanted.
Yeah. It's like literally that.
Yeah, like he's a gimmick. And then on the other hand, you'll have somebody like you mentioned before, Beastie Boys, or even more recent, you have somebody like Eminem, who's more of a product of his environment. And because he, like you mentioned earlier, he respects the culture and he respects the craft. So he doesn't carry himself like a quote-unquote black man, like.
Right, because you don't have to be someone else in order to tell a certain story.
Yeah.
Okay, he recognizes that his struggle relates in a lot of ways, and he was brought up in a certain environment, right?
Yeah.
But he's not going to sit up here and tell a story that he never lived. Right? He's telling about his trailer park problems, like shit like that.
Yeah, Eminem's not talking about gats and pulling up on people and shit that's wild.
Then you get into the Dolajal area.
Oh boy. Sensitive.
Things get tricky. Because you can make a way better impact from the position that you're in, right? If I'm in a position of privilege, I can make a way better impact standing up and fighting for people of color or whatever the case may be from my genuine perspective. When I sit here and try to start being things that I'm not, that's when the message gets a little bit, tricky and messed up. And then your impact is going to be way less hard than if you just came from a place of, a genuine place. Like,
yeah. And we point that shit out almost immediately. Like, you can tell who's real and who's, like, this is just a character.
Right.
Like, this isn't who you really are. Like, we can point that out in mere seconds.
Right. And it's just like, you're trying to be a cartoon version of what you think we are.
Yeah.
And we're just doing the best we can from our perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
Slap into our face. Because you got a lot of these young kids, most of the littles, Most of the littles.
The littles.
They're getting tattoos on the face, tattoos all over their body, colored hair, and all this wild shit. And it's like, yo, you are profiting from our culture, and you're not doing anything to give back in any way.
But it's wild how they're able to profit off of the culture that they're appropriating, yet the people actually a part of people actually a part of that culture don't get anything from it.
Well,
Isn't that wild?
It's not wild.
It's called white privilege.
It's just,
Well, yeah, no,
it's
yeah,
life.
but it's just, I mean, it's life, but it's just a warped concept of how the culture that they appropriate, they like people see it and then they don't recognize that there are other people that are actually a part of that culture that aren't being celebrated or.
It's like the J. Cole thing when he said this was maybe like 3 years ago. He said he went on iTunes one time and he wanted to just listen to some jazz music, and the whole directory was just nothing but white artists.
Yeah.
And it's like, but black people made jazz. So,
pro tip.
And you know what? There's a lot of racism when it comes to genres and the charts.
Mm-hmm.
And I get pissed off about this all the time. Just the fact that there is a pop chart and the way that we envision what that is in our heads.
mm-hmm.
You know, we could have an artist like, you know, I don't know.
Post Malone?
Like a popular black artist. Let's say Beyonce or Bruno Mars or whoever.
Yeah, Bruno.
And they start off in this urban space, right? Singing, or whatever that is, black space.
Right.
Singing black music or urban music, right? And then once they reach a certain level where white people will find them acceptable, right? Then they go over to the pop genre.
Right.
You know, and then their narrative is told that way. When in the reality, they're making black music.
Mm-hmm.
You just find it acceptable, so now it's pop.
Yeah, that was a big scandal with Bruno Mars when they were talking about, is he a cultural appropriator because of the music that he makes? Is he taking from a certain culture that's not necessarily his? And that was a whole.
And that kind of annoyed me because
that was weird.
That
I never
really annoyed
understood
me
that.
because, first of all, he's a person of color. In case you didn't notice.
Wait a minute. Breaking news.
News flash.
Breaking
I know
news.
he's a pop star, but 24 Karat Magic was definitely New Jack Swing, so I'm not even gonna hold you up there. And it's just like he makes a point in his interviews to talk about how much he respects black music and black artists, and that's why he did make an album called 24 Karat Magic. You know what I mean? And that's something that we all could relate to because we all grew up on that type. You know what I'm saying? Boys to Men, like 90s, like New Jack Swing type shit. And if you were somebody like me, like when I heard that album, I was like, this is fucking dope. Like, this is amazing. You know what I mean? And I think that we just need to start re-looking at things and reassessing, like,
I think people need to educate themselves.
People need to educate themselves because it comes from both sides too. You know, there's colorism, there's racism. We do it within our community, and it happens to us externally. And once we start figuring out how to embrace one another as, you know, brothers and sisters from the African diaspora, then we'll be more powerful. Because that's the whole, you know, point of this shit, is to break us up and make us feel like we're not united and not connected in some ways when we all are. You know, we all have a common oppressor. And the sooner that we realize that, the stronger that we'll be. We can't keep having these arguments about Bruno Mars can't sing.
Yeah, there's
New
way
Jackson.
more.
That's
There's way
fucking
more.
bullshit.
It's bullshit, and there's way more important shit happening in the world that we need to fucking solve.
Yeah, we have bigger fish to fry.
Okay.
So, I mean, I mentioned a few earlier, and I want you guys to chime in. Like, what other examples of cultural appropriation have you seen or can think of? I mentioned, like, white people having dreads, or dressing up in cultural garb, or, you know, having some sort of the characteristics of people, you know, another color. Like, what other ideas could you think of? I think the biggest example is the fucking Kardashian clan.
Oh, fuck. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, because you know what? Women of color have been told for fucking centuries.
Too big.
Your lips are too big. Your skin is too dark. Your butt's too big. You need to, like, cover your ass up. You need to cover your breasts up. We're sexualizing you, you know, at every turn. And now, because someone who identifies as white, right, who's European, when they decide to say, we think that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, they decide to say, we think braids are cool now.
Yep.
Right.
Now they're boxer braids. We're going to rename that. That's ours. And that's a fucking problem because people have been judged, people haven't gotten jobs,
Facts.
people have been fired, people have missed out on opportunities because of the way they dress, because of their culture. You know what I mean?
Dress, how they speak, what they wear.
I blame Ray J because he hit it first. It's all his fault. Seriously, no. I mean, yeah, I agree. The Kardashians are definitely an example, and then I don't know if it helps that the fact that they do happen to be in relationships with black men, how they like add on to that. You know what I'm saying? Like they make it acceptable for people like them to be a part of that culture, and for women to like pursue to like look like them or
they glorify them.
Yeah, they're glorified.
And that shit I always found that shit weird.
And now you have women of color who are like going to surgeons and they're like, I want to look like Kim Kardashian. But hold on, she's trying to look like you.
Whoa,
yeah.
Plot twist.
So what kind of fuck shit, what kind of mind fuck is going on here? And then just like you said, you have black men who put these women on a pedestal and create that conversation like, you women are not good enough. We're going to marry these women. We're going to make them the mother of our children. We're going to make them rich. We're going to make them comfortable, have comfortable lives, give them opportunities. Successful men who come from these same neighborhoods, who these same women help them out of their struggle.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? The same woman helping them pay for studio time. You know what I'm saying? Helping them break up that butt. You know what I mean? To pay for shit. And then you turn your back on them.
Yes, you're exposing people.
Yes, I'm here to expose you. And then you turn your back on them when you get in a position of power, and then you expect that now you just operate at a level that's like above everybody else, and now those problems, they're not your problems anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the reason why you're in this position, I think people forget, is to create opportunities for the people who come from those areas that you come from, who come from your culture, and don't get opportunities given to them by people in society who have the power. So now you got to a certain level, and then this is what you do. It's crazy. It's a slap in the face.
Yeah, black men definitely have to do better. From all levels. It don't even matter socioeconomic status, because broke niggas do that shit too.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have to teach our sons, to find the beauty in us and respect us and not always go outside for things that they feel like, are beautiful. And we've been told that too. We sit here and we contour our face and we contour our nose and,
foundation,
you know what I mean? And all that shit. And it's like, we're contributing to the shit. And we might think it's not a big thing. Or like, this is just who I choose to be with and this is just how she is and like whatever. But you're making a statement. You're making a statement when you say, I'm going to marry Kim Kardashian and she's going to have, after you just made us fans by saying it, and when he get on, you know what I'm saying? He give your ass up for a white girl. It's like, but you just told us, you know what I mean? You got a whole fan base. We were rocking with you because we on that same level, and then you sit here and you fucking show up with the Make America Great Again hat, and we're like, hold up.
That's a conversation for a whole.
I don't know who you're talking about.
I don't know who I'm talking about either.
It could be anybody.
I'm speaking in generalities, obviously.
Of course.
Moving along.
So, is it clear as day with cultural appropriation, or are the lines blurred a little bit?
I'm not too sure because what I was also thinking about is that a lot of people who might be the perpetrators of cultural appropriation, they may spin it as, oh no, I'm just appreciating the culture, and like after going to Africa for like a month, I've really been able to like learn the stories and learn what it's about, so I can wear this dashiki and understand where it comes from, and it's like I'm not appropriating because I'm not benefiting from this. I actually have been immersed in that culture for some time, so I have, I guess, the right or whatever the case would be to kind of like embrace this because I've been able to understand it for the most part. You know what I'm saying? So that, I think those lines are kind of blurred in the sense of like, all right, does this person genuinely like appreciate the culture that they're representing or they're showcasing as a means of like trying to promote it, or is it more like, all right, once again, you went to Africa for a month, now all of a sudden you think wearing a dashiki or doing all these things or embracing like African like customs is cool. You know what I'm saying?
I think my whole thing is like, how does that push African people, for example, with you saying the dashiki, to the forefront? Yeah, how is you doing that? No, what you need to be doing is putting African people on a pedestal and giving them the stage to create their own narratives instead of trying to create it for them. Yeah, like I don't have to wear a dashiki to appreciate your culture, you know, and have people be aware of you. I want to say no, like look at my poppin' friend, she's amazing, like you know what I'm saying? Give her, she has a voice, like let her speak, especially if I come from a place of privilege and I have that ability to, you know, reach a certain audience or whatever.
If I have a platform.
Yeah, the message doesn't always have to come from your mouth.
No, it does not. Yeah, I don't think there's any way that the lines can be blurred. It's fucking clear as day. There's just certain shit you just don't do. Like, point blank period. There's no way I could think of any, you know, facet or any avenue. It's like, that's acceptable. It's like, nah, you shouldn't be doing that shit. Like, months ago, I think I read a report. This white guy wants to be considered transracial because he went to the Philippines one time and he loved the Philippine food so much he wants to identify as a Filipino. And I'm like, bro,
that's insane. And that's where like the trans conversation gets like
what the
blurry
fuck are you talking about?
That's not how race works. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like there's no way the lines could be blurred to the point where certain shit that you do is acceptable. It's like, no.
Yeah,
you are who you are. How you were raised were how you was raised, and point blank period.
Then again, Sammy Simpson went from black to white in a couple of shades, so...
He still speaks Spanish, though.
Allegedly.
And look, that comes from a long history of whitewashing in the Dominican Republic.
Self-hate.
You know, a lot of, like, internalized hatred that we just have just across the board as people of color. And he's going through something. And unfortunately, either hopefully he ends up, you know, realizing like, yo, this is fucked up. But the reality is that he might be 9 times out of 10, he might be influencing people around him to do the same and like, you know, furthering that narrative of like white is better and white is right.
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean?
That's something that happened in the Caribbean for generations.
Please.
Yeah.
You know, the hair combo, the stay out of the sun combo. Like
I never got to stay out of the sun.
I don't think it's really like, I think as people of color, period, we've all had some sort of conversation around these same issues. And, like, we need to just start realizing that we have more in common than not.
Yeah, we keep finding new ways to, like, separate ourselves from one another, and it makes no fucking sense. All the energy that people are putting in to, like, identify people, it's like, oh, this person is different than me, and this person is different than me, or I'm better than this person. It's like all the energy could be used in a more positive light.
Right. And
actually benefit not only yourself but the people around you. Like all that negative energy is a big burden to carry.
Right. And I think that the bad feelings come when you see somebody emulating something that, you know, happens in your culture or something that you guys do, and then they're not even giving you credit for it. They're not saying like, hey, yo, I went up to the South Bronx. Okay, and these Spanish girls, they had their hair, their edges laid, and they like they brushed them down into different kinds of like designs and all these things. And now that's something that's popular now, right?
Yeah.
So like, do your edges and funny styles and funny shapes.
What I seen the other day.
When the reality is like in the 80s when like Latina girls, Puerto Rican girls were doing this shit, we were made fun of for having like crazy sideburns.
How
like,
dare you?
How dare you? And now it's like a thing, and like you kind of like leave all these people out of the narrative, and you're like, hold on, you forgot about us. So it happens internally too.
Yeah, that's like the what I saw the other day. I think it was like Balenciaga's releasing a do-rag. And I was like, come on, you gotta be fucking kidding me. This is the same do-rag that a whole bunch of white people, if they saw you wearing a do-rag out and about in the street, is automatically, he's a thug.
Exactly.
Or he's gang affiliated.
I can't even wear a hoodie.
Yeah, now that fucking Balenciaga dropped one for $600, by the way. For 600 fucking beans.
I better be waking up with the waves of the damn century for $1,600.
Waves of the gods, you mean.
I better be swimming.
Wave
I better be swimming permanently.
Waves on swim, so they hate on him.
Like, shit is just fucking out of control.
It's like, oh, so y'all perfected the wave? Okay, now we got you.
Y'all can't even get waves. What are you wearing what are you wearing your do-rag for?
Like, it's okay, be you. It's not for everybody. This came out of necessity, right? We trying to keep our shit laid.
Yeah.
Like.
I'm trying to get shit lit out here.
We need more documentaries about these specific things.
We need a do-rag documentary.
We need a do-rag doc.
We do need a do-rag doc.
It's called Silky.
Silky, the true story.
Silky behind the waves.
I love that.
Oh,
I love
Netflix,
that.
pick it up. ASAP.
Please pick it up. You
We
heard it
need
here
this.
first.
Complex. Needs
No,
something.
not complex. Not
Oh.
complex. Not complex.
Oh, that-
So is cultural appropriation only seen as a negative when it becomes like profitable or it becomes like, a badge of honor? Like people didn't really give Elvis any, heat until, years later on, and it's like, yo, like you just stole our whole swag and like getting all this, acclaim and shit for it. But I think a lot of times, especially in today's, like with the Bruno Mars thing, we've loved Bruno Mars for this whole entire time. Then this one album, now all of a sudden there's all this beef.
We've been oppressed for a really long time, and that anger has been bubbling for, that amount of time.
Generations.
And now we have the voice, and now we have the ability to, let people know how we feel, and like be able to back it up with fucking proof and
We got the receipts now.
we got the fucking receipts now.
You're not with the shits.
Okay, and you're
Word.
not hanging over us with a goddamn whip, saying shut the fuck up, or you know what I mean? Like, so it's a different time. So people have the ability to express themselves right now, and it's such a great thing. But I think we need to be mindful of that and still do our research and just not run with shit, because then it dilutes our message.
Yeah.
When we're out here just making crazy ass claims, especially when it's against one another. Like, come on now.
Yeah, that doesn't help at all.
It doesn't help.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, it's like you put in all the energy into the wrong place. You attack, you attacking people that you really shouldn't be attacking.
Right. Like, it's like, someone will post something like, oh, and these are the roots of this, or Latino, especially Latinos get it a lot, from Black American community. It's like, well, you didn't know that that's an African thing, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, hold on. Some of us knew where we came from.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us knew. Like, you heard percussion in salsa music? I don't know if you did, but it's super African. We learn bomba in school. You know what I mean? It's like any other culture. You're going to have those people who are white passing and create a certain narrative. And then you're going to have the people who are people of color within, that culture, and their voices aren't as loud.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That happens in every culture. You're always going to have those ignorant people saying dumb shit. But we have to stop generalizing things and making it be like, oh, well, you guys, or the Indians, you guys don't identify yourself as black. Like, we're brown. Like, they're brown folks that speak a different language.
We all going through the same struggle.
We all dealing with the same shit. They're dealing with bleaching in India, too. They're dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with. Cambodians. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think that's what it is. At this point, a lot of people are trying to... people are really fighting, like, whose struggle is bigger.
Yeah, like, whose struggle is the best. And then I'm sitting here sometimes, and I'm like, hold on, because there are literally Africans who don't accept Black Americans calling themselves African Americans.
Oh,
Yeah,
We
I've
know
seen
that, right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, no,
So let's not sit here and like choose who to be mad at or choose who to shine a light on, because there's problems with everybody.
it's the struggle Olympics, and
It's
everybody
the fucking
loses.
struggle Olympics.
Everyone
Okay?
gets third place.
I'm a Latino female in a wheelchair. Like,
I'm deprivileged. Come on, man. Can't win.
So, why don't white people get it? Like, why is
because
it...
they don't
Whoa,
have
whoa.
to get it.
How much time do we have?
That's a lot.
That's a deep question, Steve.
Yeah, like, why don't they get it? Like,
Well-
why is it more of, like, an ignorance thing? Like, they just don't know. Like, they don't know no better.
Well, once again, it goes back to what I was saying before about the appreciation. They feel, some white people who do appropriate the culture feel like they're appreciating it by showcasing it in their own way, instead of it being like, wait a minute, I have no type of grounding in this culture, yet I think because I'm showcasing it in my own way and trying to educate others around me, that's acceptable or that's right. You know what I'm saying? They don't realize that their, I guess, self-made mission to try to educate others and teach them something new means that you're appropriating the culture and you're using it for your own gain. I think that's why they don't particularly get it, because they're framing it for their own benefit.
Right.
Yeah, but it never works.
Oh yeah, never.
Yeah, it never works. Like,
because
I've never seen a white person with dreads be like, you know what? You really killed that look.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
You're rocking those dreads right, Rasta. Come on, fam.
Like, hold on. Isn't the whole point of Rastafarianism to fucking get away from the oppressive
no,
white people?
no, it's about
was-
smoking weed.
Oh,
Let's be honest.
wait. Like, do you think you just smoke weed?
Yeah, just
Like,
smoking weed
it's
and
fine.
go away.
Right.
Buy you a fucking 20 and get the fuck out of
You
here.
don't
Like,
need to look like a dry mop to enjoy some marijuana.
like, if you don't comb your fucking hair. But you know what? It's like, it don't matter how many backyard bashments I've been to. I'm never going to be able to tell the story of being Trini better than a Trini person. You know what I mean? Or better than a Jamaican person. Like, and that's the reality of it. Like, you have to understand your privilege. And when you are brought up in a world that gives you this sense of entitlement from the moment from before you're born, you're already entitled. All you have to do is be born and you're good. You know what I mean?
That's it.
And it's like, what we need to teach we need to teach this shit in school. Okay? Because I haven't
Facts.
used the Pythagorean theorem not one motherfucking time.
Whoa, I just used it the other day to get my bills in
You
order.
know what? Fuck
So
it.
talk for yourself.
All right, wrong again. Yes. But like, we need to learn about this. Like, we grew up learning all about their culture. We learn about all their heroes. We learn about all the wars they fought.
All the irrelevant shit.
All the fucking irrelevant shit that leaves us out of the story, that makes them look like the great guys and the conquerors and whatever. Meanwhile, you have a multicultural class full of fucking Haitians, Indians, Latinos. Like, we need to hear some of our stories too.
And the gag is those previous stories were all lies.
Fucking lies. And now we're like, those were lies.
Right.
And now you're like, oh, you're so angry. You're so mad at us.
Right.
Why are you guys so mad at us? Get over it. It was like freaking centuries ago.
How is it still called history when it's not even factual?
Like, who wrote this?
How does that work?
Who was fact checking?
These textbooks are trash. Throw them away. Burn them with fire.
Okay.
Like,
Throw my whole education away. I was lied to till like college.
Facts. I need a refund. I need a refund.
I need a refund.
I was like, my grandma says otherwise. This whole textbook is bullshit.
Word.
So to wrap things up, I think you touched on this already, but how do like people of color play a part in cultural appropriation, and how do they actually like cultural appropriate? Because there was some heat from people of color by other people of color with around Black Panther time, when everybody was dressing in dashikis to go to see the movie, and then you had like you were saying earlier with the Africans, some Africans was like, if you're gonna wear the dashiki, at least do your research and find out what tribe you're originally from to make sure you're wearing the right dashiki. So how do like people of color culturally appropriate?
I think it's because we think that because we are people of color that we have the right to handpick from other people's culture, and we don't. I think in terms of the dashiki thing, that gets a little tricky because slavery caused a clusterfuck of issues, right?
Yeah.
And the first place they went was to the Caribbean, right? And you have all these Caribbean folks and Spanish-speaking Caribbean folks, right? And they're mixed with indigenous, and slavery was a big problem because obviously you're grabbing these group of people from different tribes and you're just dropping them off places and you're making them forget their history. I don't know what tribe I'm from. Like, okay, we're gonna Taino forever, cool, but I'm sure there were other there were other indigenous tribes, correct? And then how do I know which African tribe I was from? You know what I mean? So for Latinos, I could speak from that perspective. It's like, it's super hard for us, right? Because I can't tell you anything. I can't tell you much. You know what I mean? So I know we have this DNA shit now. I'm not really like in a rush to send my blood over to some, some Quakers.
Next you
keep
see
that on file.
Next thing you see is a Yaz clone.
Like, I'm good. One of me is enough. But yeah, I mean, we just need to get in touch and start finding out what our roots are, and like,
I think it's all about education.
It definitely is.
Yeah, we all have a lot to learn about ourselves.
Education, and then actually having real conversations, because I think that's what the problem is. People just create this whole idea or have their own opinion, and then it's like you're not even talking to a person of that background.
Right.
So it's like, how do you really know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like people need to educate themselves and then also communicate with other people.
Right.
Same issues that a lot of people in the Caribbean have. When you have a conversation, it's like, oh, we do the same thing. Yours is probably just a different seasoning, or it's just a different beat to the rhythm. And it's like it's all the same shit. So I think it's all about educating yourself and then also having conversations, because there's definitely, like you mentioned, Africans do look at African Americans a certain way because, oh, you're not quote unquote pure blood because you wasn't technically born there.
Because you don't know what your tribe is.
Yeah, you don't know what your tribe is. You ain't really one of us.
But then at the same time, you also have African Americans that appropriate Asian culture, which we didn't even touch on because that's a whole different thing. Like, for example, Black China never went to China. Let's be honest.
And then Chung Li.
Right.
What the fuck?
Nicki Minaj.
Oh, like the
That's a
other
scam.
the other random what's that chick named Cuban doll? She's not even Cuban.
She's not?
No.
Really?
Yeah, I think I seen some post on Instagram. She was like, "Oh, I just like the name. I'm not really Cuban. I don't even speak Spanish." I was
Good
like,
to the day.
Bad Barbie is not even plastic. Everything's a lie.
My whole life is a lie. I'm just being lied
She's not
to.
a Barbie girl.
in a Barbie world.
I literally hate you guys.
So to wrap things up, do we have like anything to say about cultural appropriation to the masses, to the 200 people that listen to the show on a weekly basis?
You know what? I'm really on this spiel of like finding out more about my own culture, because I feel like the more you know about yourself, the less inclined you are to be looking outward to other people's culture and trying to see like, you know, I like that. Maybe that fits with me. Like maybe I should do that. Find the amazing things about your culture and tell that story, and that'll make other people proud to be who they are. And we should all be proud to be who we are, you know, especially people who have African blood, people who have indigenous blood. We're super like diverse, super strong individuals with dope stories like that came through a lot of struggle, and if we each tell those things and not create some kind of like mishmash of like bullshit, you know what I mean? Then that makes it a little bit harder to be taken over and, you know, to be forgotten about. Speaking from like being my Puerto Rican side, you know, a lot of us, there's more Puerto Ricans here on the mainland than there are in Puerto Rico. So a lot of it was due to, you know, there was no jobs, there was no resources, and like we had to assimilate. A lot of us don't know how to speak Spanish anymore. You know, a lot of us eat different foods than we would eat on the island. And I think we need to like start remembering those things and remember the great things about our culture and like learn how to live amongst one another and appreciate those differences.
Facts.
Yeah, I mean, especially with us living in New York, I think especially with like all the neighborhoods that we have are like are rooted in different cultures. Like you have Little Italy, you have like, you know, Chinatown, you have like Little Haiti or whatever. So I think for us, like if we've never been to these places, this is where we're getting that culture from those type of neighborhoods. But I mean, obviously, if we had the opportunity to travel, then I think traveling will be the best way to kind of like actually learn more about that culture and appreciate it than like say once again going to Africa and then bringing shit back and thinking like, oh, I'm African now. You know, like that's not
how it works.
That's not how your DNA works. Sorry, Tyler. Sorry, Kim. You might have to try again. You take one African class now all of a sudden. Now you're changing your name. Don't do that.
All right.
Yeah, it comes down to education. It comes down to learning. It comes down to embracing your own culture, as you were saying before. Like learn your own culture before trying to, you know, appreciate someone else's first. You know, and use that education to teach others about who you are instead of being like, all right, let me show off this other culture because I think it's cool or it's the trend. You know, like education.
I mean, I'd have to agree with what both of y'all was saying. I don't even think there's really much more for me to add. I mean, the only thing, because you brought up like the different areas that made me think about, it's funny how we'll have beef with all this other shit, but then it's like you'll have like an Italian chef and he'll have like a whole Asian menu that's inspired by Asian menu. And it's like, if you look at that industry, the food world, it's like they all like technically culturally appropriate, but it's done respectfully.
Right.
It's like, I done my research. These are how they traditionally made the food. But looking back on it, it's like, okay, I could add a little twist to it, or I could add, you know, parts of my culture into it and make it something new and refreshing. And it's like, I've never heard anybody like, oh, I'm not going there. they do Mexican food, but it's not right by real Mexicans. So it's like you could kind of look in that industry and it's like, all right, if they're able to all, unite in a certain way or all do things in a respectful manner, we should be able to do that in other avenues as well.
Right.
So
as long as they're not adding raisins, that's all that matters.
Don't you fucking put a raisin in my empanada.
Don't you put the raisins in a jerk chicken. That's not how jerk chicken works.
No.
Where's the sauce? Where's the color?
Just X out raisins entirely.
Word. They're the devil. They're the real enemy here.
So I want to thank Yaz for coming through this week. Happy Puerto Rican Day Parade.
Wepa.
Yeah, wepa indeed.
Learn some stuff. Look into us.
Oh,
We're pretty interesting folks.
Look into us.
We out here.
We out here. We out here.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll check y'all next week.
Hey.
We are out here. Fuck y'all talking about? Sophisticated ignorance. Are y'all fucking crazy?
That's a fact. Talk
Are y'all
that shit.
crazy? Yo, y'all getting me tight. Like, I be out here trying to be humble. Let's not get fucking crazy. Sophisticated ignorance. All right?